We are on week 5 of our live cooking series. This week we are talking summer squash. We're making a creamy lemon orzo dish with summer squash. This dish came out like a risotto almost, so I'm calling it an orzotto, and I'm sticking to that term. I'm claiming that term as my own. So orzo is just little tiny pasta. It's pasta. It's not a grain. It's not like a whole grain. It's a pasta. So it cooks like regular pasta. Usually we just boil it in water and drain it. But in this dish, we're actually cooking it in a big pot, a big pan, actually, a big skillet. And we're going to add all the liquid in there and bring it to a boil and actually let the orzo absorb all of the liquid so that it becomes more of this like creamy risotto, this creamy orzo that's kind of like a risotto, but that will come together a lot quicker than a traditional risotto would. And then we're using a lot of similar flavors to a risotto. We're going to have some Parmesan cheese in there. We're adding some more summer flair to it by adding the lemon in there. And then we're finishing it off with basil, which, you know, rounds out the whole thing. I just showed you, you want a large skillet that is, has tall sides. Because like I said, we're pouring all the stock and stuff. Everything is getting cooked right in this one pan, which is something else that's really awesome about this dish. It's a one pan dish. But so you want something with high sides so that when you put the stock in there, it doesn't overflow. So you want that, something that you're gonna be stirring with, measuring cups and spoons, your cutting board and a knife, salt and pepper, olive oil. We're gonna be using a stock with this, like I said, so I'm using chicken broth because that's what I have on hand. You can use vegetable broth, vegetable stock, chicken stock, whatever you have, whatever you prefer the flavor of. Anything will work. And that's it. All right, so we can get started. So we're kind of just gonna, with this dish, like I said, it comes together pretty quickly because it's all just in one pan. So kind of as you add ingredients into the pan, you can continue chopping up the next ingredient to kind of keep things moving along and keep you busy while you're kind of waiting for this to cook. So there's not really much to be done in advance. You just kind of chop everything and transfer it to the pan as you go. So it's nice to stand. I'll show you how I have it here. I just have my board placed right next to my pan so we can just go back and forth. Okay, so the first ingredient that's going into the pan is our shallot. So we're going to chop that guy up. So you just want one small shallot. If you have a big one, just use half of it. You definitely don't need anything more than one this size. And we're just going to chop it up nice and fine. Okay. So I've shown a shallot before how I do it, but I kind of treat a shallot similarly to an onion. Just cut off those ends and then cut it in half. Peel off the skin. Okay. And then cutting it with towards the root. Okay, so keeping the root at the end, just like I do with an onion. So we'll cut, it's a little bit harder because it's smaller, of course, but cut vertically down, and then just one slice horizontally, and then cut back across. You do not have to cut it like that. They are really, it's much smaller than an onion, so it can be harder to handle. But it just brings you to that, mince stage quicker. And then just run your knife through a little bit to get them nice and small. These are gonna cook down, unlike when we've used them before in like dressings and things, where you want them to really be tiny because you're gonna be eating them raw. But in this case, we're cooking them down, so just more of like a rough chop They don't need to be super tiny. And get my other half here. I'm going to turn the skillet up to a medium heat now. Okay. And then to our pan, we're adding about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. We don't need a lid for this at all. Our next ingredient is going to be our garlic. So I wrote in the recipe like 1 to 2 cloves of garlic. Again, to your preference. If you like things extra garlicky, use 2. If you don't like garlic as much, use 1. Also, if like you have tiny garlic cloves, you can use 2. If you have like, this is a pretty big clove, so I'm just using this 1. So just kind of do it to your preference. And the garlic we want nice and minced as well. Chopping up the garlic here. For the garlic, I just slice up and then just run your knife through until it gets nice and minced. Something that I learned in culinary school that I still take with me is garlic gets really sticky when you're chopping it. So I try to stick to just 1 finger to kind of wipe it off the knife, gather it on the board so that your whole hand doesn't end up like sticky and stinking like garlic. Just designate 1 finger to be the garlic finger. Okay. And again, the garlic is getting cooked down too, so it doesn't need to be like super, super, super fine. This is good. Okay, and now our oil should be hot enough to add our shallot in. So we're gonna add the shallot in first before the garlic. Same thing if you were using any other kind of onion. You want the shallot to have a chance, so I just have the shallot in here with the olive oil. You want the shallot to have a chance to really soften. And if the garlic is in there for too long, it'll burn. So you don't really want to add the garlic too soon. Okay. And then to get the shallots to help them sweat a little bit and really soften, we're going to add a pinch of salt in there with the shallots and the olive oil. So salt draws out moisture. So when you add the salt at this step, it helps draw the moisture out of the shallot, helping them to soften more easily. So we're gonna let the shallots cook down for just like 3 minutes or so, and then we're gonna add in our garlic clove. All right, and then once we add in our, after we add in our garlic, we're adding in some fresh thyme. So this is our fresh thyme. So it comes on, you know, like a woody kind of stem, but the leaves are really soft and they're really tiny, so you don't even really need to chop them, or you can just give them a really rough chop. So with getting thyme, we only want the leaves. You don't want to eat the woody part. So let me find a good one here that's easier to show you. So starting, if you hold at the very top here, and then you slide your fingers down, then the leaves just come off. So that's how you handle thyme. And so we're adding thyme in here. Thyme is an herb that goes really well with like meat and poultry. You'll probably see it the most often, but it also goes really nicely with cheese. And just give my shallot to stir here. It goes nicely with cheese, and it has a very like earthy kind of flavor to it, so it balances nicely with the sweetness of the summer squash that we're using. And it'll go nicely with that Parmesan cheese that we're putting in. So we want about a tablespoon of the fresh thyme leaves. So you just keep picking those off the stems. It can get a little tedious. And so in this recipe we're using thyme and we're using basil. So basil is a very delicate herb. So like we've used it in other recipes, we like to add it in at the very end. Whereas thyme is a little bit more of a hardier fresh herb. So it can be added in earlier in cooking, which is what we're doing here. Same thing with like rosemary is like a hardier herb, so you could add that in earlier in the cooking process. Okay, all right, my shallots are looking good, so I'm gonna add my garlic in here. And just cook that for like a minute or so. Well, I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. If you're using dried herbs, because you could use dried thyme here instead of fresh thyme if you couldn't find it or whatever. But the dried herbs are going to be a lot more potent than fresh herbs, meaning you need less for the same amount of flavor. So here we're using a tablespoon of fresh thyme. If you're using dried thyme, you only need like 1 to 2 teaspoons. Okay, so I just gave the thyme a really just rough chop and adding that in with our shallots and our garlic. My pan is getting too hot. Okay. Okay. All right, and it's time for our squash. So I'm using 1 zucchini and 1 yellow squash. So all different kinds of summer squash, zucchinis, they're all in season now. Just cutting these into rounds that are like a 1/4 inch thick or so. So you want about 2 cups total of the slices of zucchini and of the slices of squash, I should say. So that's about 2 whole squashes. Okay, I'm gonna add the zucchini right in there and cut up my other squash. If some of the pieces, like this squash is getting really wide at the end, you can cut them in half just so that they're all like closer to the same size. Okay. So all the squash is in the pan now. All right, so now with the zucchini in the pan, we're gonna let this cook now for like 5 minutes or so, just for the zucchini to soften a little bit. The squash will soften a little bit in the pan now, just for a few minutes, and then it's going to cook down even more once we add the stock and stuff, and everything cooks down. They'll get nice and soft, so they don't have to get like cooked to the point that you're ready to eat them in the pan, just until they soften up a little bit. And so while these are cooking up a little, we can talk a little bit about summer squash. So like I said, there's a lot of different varieties of squash. It's not just zucchini, and it's not just the yellow summer squash. You'll see tons of different types of squash if you go to a local farmer's market. All different shapes and sizes and varieties. They can all be used pretty much interchangeably. Like you could use any variety of squash that you slice up, you could use in this recipe. But in the summer, when they're in season, they're really sweet and really delicious. Again, like most fruits and vegetables, high in antioxidants. So particularly, the squash is high in vitamin A, which is really good for your eyes. It also has some heart protective benefits, some cancer protective benefits. It's full of B vitamins, which are good for a lot of things like your energy levels. And squash, which you probably know from cooking with zucchini, has a higher water content, right? So you'll even see when you cook it that you get more moisture. So the higher water content in these vegetables makes them really good for your digestion. So water is good for helping us to have good poops. So having a high water content in your food actually contributes to your water content for the day. Right? It doesn't all have to be glasses of water. It does also come from your food. So these, the squash is getting nice and soft already. Some other fun things to do with different kinds of summer squash. They're really good on the grill. You can toss them on the grill in slices, put them on a kebab. You can do like zucchini boats or other squash boats and slice them in half and scoop out the insides. And you can fill them the same way that you would do like a stuffed pepper. You could do a stuffed zucchini. And again, like with all of these seasonal vegetables, because they have so much flavor when they're in season, they're really good just on their own, or just without very much manipulation. So putting them on like a flatbread is really delicious. Or like I said, just having them grilled, just bringing out that flavor even more. Okay. So I'm at this point now where my squash is pretty softened. So now what we're going to do is add our orzo, the uncooked orzo. We're going to add it to the pan. And we're just going to stir it in here, and it's just going to get it a little bit toasty, which will help develop its flavors a little bit more. So really just stirring it around for a minute or so. Okay, so it's just in here now with the squash. So all we've added so far salt-wise was a little pinch of salt with the shallots. So we can add another pinch of salt and some pepper here to season everything up. Give it one more stir. Okay, now we're ready for our stock. So we're adding in 3 cups of stock. And you'll have, wow, I didn't realize how loud that was until it just until it just quieted down. Okay, so 3 cups of stock. And you'll have, if you're using like a box stock like I am, you'll have a little bit left. Most box stocks are 4 cups. Keep that handy because you might notice as this starts cooking, if it starts to thicken up too much, or if it's thickening up and the orzo isn't fully cooked through, you can always add some more stock to get it to the consistency that you like. Okay, so after adding the stock in, also you can kind of scrape the bottom of the pan. So that's gonna pull up what's called the fond. So that's all of the stuff that kind of gets stuck to the pan from cooking everything else. Of course, you don't want to pull up burnt things. You know, if it's too burnt, you might need to wipe out your pan. But if it's not burnt, the stuff on the bottom of the pan is actually very tasty. So we use liquid to deglaze the pan to pick up all that fond that's on the bottom of the pan. So we do that. Okay, and now this baby is ready to cook. So we are going to raise the heat to high. We want to bring this to a boil. So we want the stock to start boiling. We want, like I said, we're not using a lid here. We want the liquid to evaporate, and that's what's going to help this all thicken up. So all the bubbles and the steam that are coming out, that's the liquid evaporating. So that's what's thickening it up. So that's why, you know, when we're cooking, like sometimes we want a lid on because we want to keep that liquid in there. Sometimes we want the lid off because we want the liquid to come out for something to thicken, usually like a sauce or something like this. You know, if you're like reducing something to make it a thicker sauce, you would have the lid off, and all of that steam that comes out is the liquid evaporating and the whole thing thickening up. So that's what we want here. So once this comes to a boil, it should boil for about 10 minutes or so, and we're going to stir it every couple of minutes. So if you were doing like a traditional risotto, you would be, you know, you're constantly pouring in liquid, stirring, pouring in liquid, stirring, and it's like an hour-long process. So here, this is just gonna take like 10 minutes or so. We're still gonna get a really nice, creamy dish. And okay, so in the meantime, we can just work on our remaining ingredients. So we're going to be adding in the zest and the juice of a whole lemon. I did this last week too with the lime. Remember, when you need the zest and the juice, you want to zest before you slice the lemon or the lime or orange, whatever it is. Before you slice it in half, you want to get the zest. So again, I'm using a microplane. You can use a grater like this, or if you might actually have a zesting tool. If I could find, oh, here, like this. So this is a zesting tool where you actually just like scrape it. Whatever tool you have works. I prefer using the microplane. And just like I was saying last week with the lime, oops, I'll show you. We only want to get just the yellow. We don't want to get too far into the pith of the lemon, which is the white part. That's bitter. So just keep rotating the lemon around so you just get that yellow. And the reason why, you know, sometimes you use the zest and sometimes you don't, right? But the zest just gives it like a very pungent floral kind of lemon flavor that's different than just the lemon juice. So when you want something to really, right, this is creamy lemony orzo. So when you want something to really pick up the lemon flavor, adding in the zest is really nice. Or like we did last week with the salmon, we put the lime zest as a garnish. So that could be a really good way to like add a punch of flavor at the very end as well. But zest has a lot of good uses. You could put zest in dressings to make like a real, you know, like a lemon vinaigrette. Adding the zest to make it even lemony and lemonier, more lemony. So see, we don't want to go too far into the white part. That's where it gets bitter. So we want to just stay at the surface. Okay. All right, and we'll just set that zest aside. Okay, and then we're gonna want our lemon juice. So like always, a little pressure. Roll it to loosen up those juices. And the juice is going to go right into our pan. We're gonna add the juice in right towards the end of the orzo being done. And so we're not reducing the heat on this. Once it comes to a boil, let it boil. We have bubbles forming now at the surface, so boil, right, is rapid bubbling, so that's what we want. So from this point, I'm going to time about 10 minutes. And we will, like I said, we want to keep stirring every couple of minutes. The orzo will start to stick to the bottom of the pan if you're not stirring it. And so like I said, we are adding Parmesan cheese in here. Also at the end, we're gonna just stir that in. So you can use just regular grated Parmesan cheese like this, just, you know, already grated. You can use, for like a really strong, sharp Parmesan flavor, you can use a fresh, you know, freshly grated Parmesan cheese. I like to add, just because it's harder to measure from something freshly grated, can add the half a cup of Parmesan cheese from here in there, and then finish it off with the freshly grated Parmesan cheese for serving. I also have here some Pecorino Romano cheese, and you could also do that. So Pecorino and Parmesan have a little bit different flavors. So again, preference, whatever you like. If you like to do a combination, so you get a little bit of the flavor of both of them, you can do that. Okay, so we're at a pretty rapid boil now. And we just want to leave it like this for 10 minutes, stirring occasionally. And by the time all the liquid is absorbed, you do want the orzo to be cooked through. So that's why I say, as it's getting towards the end, as you see, it's really thickening up. You just want to taste that orzo, and if it's not fully cooked, then you can add some more liquid in the pan. And all of the squash in here is getting nice and softened. You could also make this kind of dish, like just make the orzo dish without any vegetables. And then if you have like roasted vegetables on hand, you know, if you like prep some roasted veggies earlier in the week or something, you could always just toss already cooked vegetables into the orzo. Okay, so I think we're ready now for the lemon juice. So we're using the juice of the whole lemon. Squeeze that right in there. It's been just about 10 minutes. Okay. Whoops, dropped the seed in there. Oh, there it is. Stir that in. Okay. All right, so this is thickened up pretty nicely. It will also continue to thicken as it sits. So if there's still a little bit of liquid there, that's still okay. we added the Parmesan cheese, that's gonna help thicken it as well. So you can see that it's gotten pretty thick at this point, and most of my liquid is gone, right? So you wanna see like at the bottom of the pan that most of that liquid is gone. Okay, and so that was about like 10 to 12 minutes. So at this point, we can turn off the heat. You can leave it sitting there, but just turn off the heat. Like I said, it'll continue to thicken as it sits here. And we're gonna add in our cheese. So a half a cup of grated Parmesan cheese. Dump that right in there. Oof. So good. Stir that in. And we're also going to stir in our lemon zest. So the reason I keep them separate, the lemon zest is combined, juice and zest. Why I add the juice and the zest in at separate times. Adding the zest in towards the end helps keep it really like vibrant and fresh. I like to just kind of add it in towards the end rather than letting the zest cook too much. I just think that it keeps its brightness when we just stir it in at the end. Wow, you guys, this smells very good. That's it. You can see it's nice and creamy. It smells amazing. And I'm just gonna leave it in here. Ooh, even the Parmesan cheese. You don't usually see Parmesan cheese have a cheese pull, but it does. Okay, so that's good, and we are just going to garnish with some fresh basil. So like I said earlier, the basil is a more delicate fresh herb, so we add it just at the very end. It'll get all wilted if you add it in too soon. And the basil just gives us that really, really bright, summery flavor. So I'm just roughly chopping it up. And we're just gonna garnish with that. So you just need enough to, however much you want, just enough to garnish. And okay, that's it. I don't know how to show this best to you. Here we go. So that's that. Our ORZOTTO, as I'm going to call it, with summer squash.